Thanks for clicking on the video. Today we have 3 stories based in or around the beautiful Loch Ness in Scotland. Have any of you been to Loch Ness? Please write in the comments below.
The group of tourists had been eagerly anticipating their trip to Loch Ness for weeks. The legends of the elusive monster had captured their imaginations, and they had come from all over the world to catch a glimpse of it. As they made their way towards the loch, they couldn't help but feel a sense of excitement and anticipation. The lush green hills and rolling landscape of the Scottish Highlands surrounded them, creating an otherworldly atmosphere that seemed to promise adventure and mystery. When they finally arrived at the shore of the loch, they felt as though they were standing at the edge of the world. The waters stretched out before them, shrouded in a thick mist that only added to the sense of intrigue and anticipation. But as they began to set up camp, something strange began to happen. One by one, members of the group began to disappear. At first, they thought it was just coincidence, perhaps someone had gone for a walk or had accidentally wandered off. But as more and more people went missing, they knew something was terribly wrong. It wasn't long before they realized that they weren't alone on the shores of the loch. There was something else out there, something sinister and dangerous. And it was watching them. As the night wore on, the tourists grew more and more terrified. They tried to stick together, but it seemed that the mysterious kidnappers were always one step ahead of them. They heard strange noises in the distance, scratching, whispering, and the occasional rumble that shook the land beneath their feet. One of the tourists, a woman from Brazil, suddenly screamed out in terror as she saw a shadowy figure lurking in the darkness. The group rushed towards her, but when they arrived, she had disappeared without a trace. They huddled together, trying to fend off the terror that was closing in around them. They built up the fire, hoping that the light would keep the unknown force at bay. But it was no use. As the night went on, more of their group was taken away, leaving only a few scattered belongings behind. As dawn broke, the remaining members of the group made their way to the water's edge. But they were too late. The kidnappers had already taken their victims away, leaving behind only a few traces of blood and torn clothing. The tourists knew they had to leave Loch Ness as quickly as possible. They had come to hunt for a monster, only to become the prey themselves. The legend of the Loch Ness monster had taken on a much darker meaning, and the group knew they would never forget the horrors they had witnessed on the shores of Scotland's most infamous loch. They left, shaken and traumatized, with a newfound understanding that sometimes, the monsters that lurk in the darkness are all too real.
It was a bright and beautiful day in Scotland, and a group of tourists had gathered on the banks of Loch Ness, hoping to catch a glimpse of the legendary creature that had been said to reside in the deep, dark waters of the lake for hundreds of years, the Loch Ness monster. The excitement was building up in the group as they jostled for the best possible spot from where they could capture the coveted picture of the elusive creature. The serene silence of the loch was interrupted only by the occasional swish of the water, sending shivers down the spine of the eagerly awaiting tourists. As the afternoon sun began to dip towards the horizon, the air around the lake started to get cooler. Suddenly, the calm surface of the water was disturbed. A large, dark shape emerged from deep within and started to move towards the shore. All eyes were fixed on the water as the shape got closer and closer. Time stood still for a moment as the tourists stared in shock. This was it, the moment they had been waiting for. With trembling hands, they raised their cameras and snapped pictures of the creature. But then, something strange started to happen. The dark shadow continued to move closer and closer, growing bigger and bigger until it was clear that this was no ordinary creature. The tourists began to scream in horror as the Loch Ness monster showed its true form, an enormous, terrifying sea monster, with jaws that could swallow a boat whole. The monster let out a deafening roar, causing the tourists to panic and run in different directions. The once serene and peaceful atmosphere around the loch was now filled with chaos, as people scrambled to safety. Some were so scared that they didn't even take their eyes away from the monster as they ran, their feet carrying them away as fast as they could go. The monster kept roaring, causing waves to crash around the edge of the lake, sending people tumbling into the water. Fear and panic was everywhere, as people fought for their safety. Some of the tourists fell into the water and began to drown, unable to swim in the tumultuous waves or break free of the monster's grasp. The Loch Ness monster then disappeared back into the water, leaving destruction and terror in its wake. The once excited and curious tourists were now cowering in fear, realizing that they had encountered something that was beyond human comprehension. As the sun set on the shores of Loch Ness, the tourists were shivering and shaking with fright, but none of them would ever forget the terror they had witnessed. The Loch Ness monster had revealed itself to be more than just a myth or a legend. It was a monster straight out of their worst nightmares, and it had shown its true power and fury. The water of the loch was now eerily quiet, as if the monster had never surfaced at all. But the tourists knew that it was still there, lurking in the depths, waiting for its next victim. The sky had turned into a deep shade of orange, casting an eerie glow over the lake. The silence was broken only by the occasional whimper of a terrified tourist or the sound of footsteps as they made their way back to civilization. For those who had witnessed the Loch Ness monster, life would never be the same. They would always carry the memory of that horrifying day with them, wondering if they would ever see the monster again. As they made their way back to their hotels, the tourists were still shaking with fear. They had come to Scotland to see the beauty of the country and the mystery of the Loch Ness monster, but they had never expected to encounter such terror. The Loch Ness monster had proved to be more than just a legend. It was a real and terrifying creature, and the tourists had witnessed its power firsthand. They would never forget the fear they had experienced, and they would always be wary of the dark and deep waters of Loch Ness.
I hope you enjoy the content I upload. If you like what I'm doing, why not think about clicking on the subscribe button to keep up to date on my uploads. Thank you all for the great support.
Captain Thompson had spent his entire life on the water, and he was no stranger to danger. He had seen his fair share of storms and sea monsters, but nothing could have prepared him for what he and his crew were about to face. The Loch Ness was shrouded in mist, and the waters were dark and foreboding. The crew had been scanning the depths for hours, hoping to catch a glimpse of the elusive monster of legend. The sonar beeped and chirped, but it was all background noise until a large object appeared on the screen. Captain Thompson knew they had to investigate. He ordered a team of divers to suit up and prepare for the dive. The divers descended into the murky depths, their flashlights illuminating the way. When they returned to the surface, they were pale and shaking. They had found the remains of the Loch Ness monster, but it was the manner in which it had been killed that left them terrified. The monster had been ripped apart by something powerful and monstrous, and the crew knew that it was still down there, waiting for them. Captain Thompson ordered his crew to prepare for a deep dive. He knew the risks, but he was determined to get to the bottom of what had killed the monster. As they descended further into the loch, the captain couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Suddenly, the ship was rocked by a violent force, and the crew scrambled to maintain control. The captain barked orders, trying to keep his crew calm in the midst of the chaos. In the midst of the commotion, a voice crackled to life over the radio. "Captain, we've found something." The crew gathered around the monitors, their eyes widening in horror as the images came into focus. It was a creature unlike anything they had ever seen before. It was larger than the Loch Ness monster, with a gaping mouth and razor-sharp teeth. Its eyes glowed with a sinister intelligence, and the crew knew immediately that it had killed the monster. And now, it was coming for them. Captain Thompson ordered the crew to arm the ship's weapons, but it was too late. The creature smashed through the hull of the ship, tearing apart the vessel with ease. The crew screamed as they scrambled to escape, but the creature was relentless. With no other option, the captain took control of the submersible and plunged it into the depths, hoping to evade the creature's wrath. They evaded the monster for hours, their oxygen supplies dwindling as they fought to stay alive. The captain knew that their only hope was to emerge from the loch, battered and bruised but alive. When they finally surfaced, they were forever changed by the horror they had witnessed. Captain Thompson knew that the Loch Ness monster was not the only monster lurking in the depths, and that the loch held many secrets that were best left undiscovered. But he also knew that he would never stop searching for the truth, no matter what horrors awaited him.